Okay, here goes. So the sun entered the sign of Aries on, gosh, do I have this here? I think I do, March the 19th, a few days ago. And we have a new moon in Aries, which I referenced in my last couple of videos, on March the 24th, in a few days' time. The moon is currently in, this is a new moon in Aries video, but it's going to cover a number of things. The moon is currently in Pisces for the next couple of days. And remember that our last new moon occurred in the sign of Pisces around Feb 24th. And when the moon comes back to Pisces right before a new moon, there are two things that are at play. One, an old cycle is finishing up. And this old cycle started around Feb 24th. Mercury had gone retrograde on Feb the 17th, as I recall, and the new moon was conjunct Mercury retrograde. So it was a Mercury retrograde new moon. And Mercury and the moon is back in Pisces now, and Mercury is now direct. So whatever these last 28 days, this last 28-day cycle was about, is now wrapping up. It's finishing up. So don't be surprised if you find yourself in a space of processing the essence of what the last 28 days may have been about, or if you know where Pisces sits in your chart, a sense of where things have gotten to or come from, or what has been occurring since February the 24th. And keep in mind that we're not done with the sign of Pisces yet, because Mercury remains in Pisces until April the 10th. And whatever it was that the Mercury Pisces circle started, there's certainly a sense or a need for a certain amount of action till May the 4th anyway. And then at a certain point over the summer, I believe mid-May to end June, Mars comes into Pisces. So the Pisces, as I've mentioned in some videos before, outside of the eclipses, the Pisces and the Aries parts of the chart this year are significantly activated in interesting ways. The first half of this year, especially Pisces, and the second half of this year, Aries, although we have had Venus already go through Aries, and the sun is now in Aries about to make a new moon. But the significant transit with Aries, which is Mars coming in here in the middle of summer and then staying for the rest of the year, which is unusual because Mars only stays 45 days in a sign. Mars is going to be in Aries for 6 months. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about that later. But there's a new moon in outside of the eclipse is one of the two important parts of the chart. So I think it makes sense to pay attention to it. It's also, after the last new moon and the last full moon, an interesting new moon at present, and we'll get to that in a second. Aries is the first sign of the zodiac in the northern hemisphere. It is the sign that ushers in spring. It is technically the start of the astrological new year, the day of the equinox, the day when the day and night are balanced. It's spring, officially. We come to this new moon. The second thing about the moon being in Pisces is that it's the last 2 or 3 days before a new moon. So don't be surprised if not only is the last lunar cycle ending, regular subscribers to my YouTube channel will have heard this tons of times before. Don't be surprised if getting things done over the next 48 hours is a struggle. When the moon is diminishing to nothingness and meeting up with the sun and starting the new moon in Aries, which is on the 24th at 2:29 a.m., I think. 2:29 a.m., March the 24th, Pacific time. A certain amount of exhaustion, depletion, needing to rest, needing to put up your feet. For those people who are in some sort of quarantine or lockdown, energetically at least, it's not a bad place to be with regard to being able to put up your feet and just kind of letting go and releasing the energies associated to this last 28-day cycle now. So just be prepared that your energy might be depleted, and it's not that you won't get things done. It's just that getting things done is going to be a little bit like wading through treacle. It's going to feel like, oh, I have to get this done, but I suddenly find myself in bed under a comforter. Am I going to take a nap or am I going to get it done? I end up taking a 2-hour nap, and then I start getting it done, and then it's bedtime, that kind of energy. The new moon will happen, and it will kickstart a new cycle. Leading up to this new moon, as we've discussed in the last couple of videos, as the coronavirus has taken on greater emphasis and impact for more and more people globally, but especially here in the US, starting to in India, as I understand it, Even in geographies, thank you to folks who comment on my videos, even in geographies that are not directly impacted by cases, banning foreign travel, closing down the borders, there is an impact. There is an impact. We talked about the fact that astrologers are trying to make sense of where in the chart and where with current transits this might be showing up. I'm being gingerly. Some people are emphatic about where it's showing up. I'm being careful. And it could very well be, given the way this week has gone, we thought with Mars conjuncting Jupiter, Pluto, and preparing to conjunct Saturn, and the fact that the last few degrees, the last 10 odd degrees of Saturn has some pretty interesting and heavy conjunctions, as this year goes on, that could be that could be the signal of where all of this is coming from. So if I do a quick summary of those transits, Saturn conjuncted Pluto, Saturn the planet of discipline and consequence and restriction and strictness, conjuncted Pluto, the planet of death and transformation, on January the 12th. And it's not the date that's important, it's the weeks or the days leading up to it. So we could treat that as a sort of a starting. That's the first of these conjunctions. Mars is the planet of action and drive. And Mars has been in Capricorn since the middle of February. But Mars makes its heavy-hitting conjunctions because we've got the South Node in Capricorn, we've got Jupiter in Capricorn, we've got Saturn in Capricorn, we've got Pluto in Capricorn, we've got Mars going through this area, and Jupiter and Pluto, Jupiter's going to be here for much of the year, Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto are going to be here for much of the year. Saturn briefly is moving into Aquarius in a few days' time till the end of June, but then it's back here for the second half of the year to finish up its tasks, its agenda that has been in place since December the 20th, 2017. You can refer to my last couple of videos, particularly my last video, to go over some of this stuff. So Mars, the planet of action, is conjuncting these heavy-hitting planets yesterday, which would be March the 20th. Mars conjuncted Jupiter, planet of endings and new beginnings. Tomorrow it conjuncts Pluto, the planet of death and transformation. On March the 31st it conjuncts Saturn, and then on April the 4th Jupiter conjuncts Pluto, and Jupiter does this twice more on June the 30th and November the 12th. So if we're looking at Pluto, the planet of death and transformation, as being somehow and with Pluto, there's a sense of changes and things coming in that we have no control over. So that it's whatever's occurring is pretty Plutonian in terms of its transformation and transforming, especially in Capricorn, transforming structures and transforming what has been in place for a long time, transforming what is conservatively in place in terms of rulership and leadership, killing it and transforming it. And certainly Mars, as the planet of drive and action, has a tendency, on the one hand, these transits give us a certain amount of energy and drive and power. But Mars has a tendency, being the male planet of testosterone and kind of hammering and the god of war, to go in, and with these transits, it's like a pow pow. It's like a punch after another punch after another punch. And certainly this week, as I said in my last couple of videos, if these transits are to be held responsible for the virus situation, then this week has an intensity to it, and the blows will come one by one. And they have. They've been in the works since the middle of January, even in the weeks leading up to it, if we look at when it is that the virus first hit. But this week especially has had a tremendous amount of intensity as we head towards the new moon on the 24th. Are the blows done? Not quite. We can't ignore the Jupiter-Pluto transit on April the 4th, and we can't quite ignore the fact that Jupiter is going to try to create new beginnings out of this forest fire. This is directly in reference to my last video, till November of this year. Does this mean that the virus stays with us till November of this year or longer or whatever? We're going to wait and see. We're going to wait and see what Jupiter and Pluto are doing. Clearly, all of these transits also have an impact on us personally. Now, the last new moon and full moon have really behaved very literally. The last new moon was conjunct Mercury retrograde, a time when forward movement is difficult, and the best advice you're traditionally given is to relax and let go, and there will be delays, and details will be unclear, And really the last 28-day cycle, if you look at where the quarantines and lockdowns started and where they've been in place, has very much had a Mercury retrograde on steroids quality. It was also a new moon that I said felt like a full moon. The last full moon in Virgo, and all these videos are online, felt a little bit like a new moon to us, and Mercury was stationary. So it's one thing to have Mercury retrograde and Mercury stationary. That video we titled A Pregnant Pause at that time, and certainly so much has been put on pause for so many people over the past couple of weeks. This particular new moon, fascinatingly, is conjunct Chiron, and the word that is most associated with Chiron is healing. Whenever I see a Chiron transit, it's not a healing that I am always excited to see. You know, I'm much more interested with Chiron transits around the wounding, around what it is that needs to be healed. Where's the wound? What are the behaviors? What are the events that are causing the sense of intense woundedness that then needs to be healed? And with Chiron, we all have Chiron in some part of our charts. And Chiron does a full return around the chart in 50 years. And the Chiron return, in some ways, is the last of the maturing transits that we deal with. Some would argue it's the second Saturn return, but I think by the time the second Saturn return between the ages of 56 to 60, we're really thinking about our third act, if we've made it that far. Now, as we head to the age of 50 with the Chiron return, typically, whatever wound we have been carrying in our life, as we head towards this age of 50, the Chiron return allows us to somehow get reacquainted with that wound again. A painful process, but in a way as adults that we can remove the triggers, that we can heal ourselves. So some part of Chiron at least involves sitting and experiencing the wound. I do think that this wouldn't, because the lunations have been so literal, I do think that we can refer to this as a new moon of healing. As I've said, the blows still keep coming. We can't ignore April the 4th, which is a few days before the next full moon in Libra. So it's not as if this new moon is going to happen and the clouds are going to clear and everything is going to miraculously disappear. If it does, I'd be thrilled. We could look back on this video and say, all right, new moon of healing, yeah. But it's unlikely. There certainly is news brewing as we head to this new moon about more tests being made available and perhaps certain cures being made available. But I would, but given where they're coming from and how the news around this is being managed, there is, and given other sources of information that say, well, whatever's coming up is still going to take a while to get around, I would say, well, we still get to wait and experience. This seems like this is going to be a yearly process, but if, like other instances of this family of virus, as the weather heats up, another reason to herald and welcome spring, there's some correlation between hotter and more humid weather and this virus then disappearing. We hope that maybe we get a respite, we get a relief, it somehow disappears. But we're going to wait and see what that looks like. This is a new moon of healing, and what I would say is, my feeling is that as we work our way through this 28-day cycle that is starting on April the 24th, I would pay attention to and look to where some of this healing is coming from. You know by watching my videos that I tend to be skeptical even of whatever it is that I myself am interpreting. So I'm going to do us all a favor and be bold enough to interpret this new moon in the way that I interpreted the last new moon and full moon. One which was conjunct Mercury retrograde behaved very literally. One conjunct Mercury stationary behaved very literally. This one is a new moon of healing. So we should assume that on some level it is ushering in a 28-day cycle that is punctuated by, emphasized by, focused on healing. How much longer do we need to sit in the wound, however? Surely the way things are accelerating, it accelerates the need for healing, the need for healing tools. So let's just see how this 28-day cycle goes. Certainly as this 28-day cycle comes to a close, as we head to the next full moon at the end of April, I think we should expect that there will be greater clarity with regard to what is in the works. Is there a possibility for things to appear in a speedier manner? Yes, there is, but we're not yet, by the time we have the new moon, Mars has conjuncted Jupiter and it has conjuncted Pluto. We're done. The Pluto conjunction is tomorrow. And it's again the days leading up to it. It was this past week that was important. So it may very well be that this ray of light, this ray of spring shine, I'm going to form my words the German way. This ray of spring shine. German has a tendency to kind of put words together. Anyway, let's assume that this new moon is going to give us a ray of spring that is going to start to clear out some of these energies and bring in some hope at least. But it would be foolish, indeed wrong, to think that it's just going to be some sort of instantaneous process. If it is, we can, as I said, come back and say, hey, let's just keep interpreting these new moons and full moons very literally. Okay, let's also do something we did in the last couple of new moon and full moon videos, which is look at rulership. This new moon is in the sign of Aries. Aries is ruled by Mars. Mars has been very active and very impactful this past week. It is in the sign of Capricorn, ruled by Saturn. Saturn, at the time of the new moon, has just entered Aquarius, a sign it co-rules. So number one, we have the planet Saturn, the planet of discipline, ruling time-space reality, practicality, rigor, making the right, sensible discipline. Saturn is not about indulging your emotional child. It is not about reaching for that slice of cake when you're trying to lose weight. It is not about being under the comforter when you have work to do. Saturn is the ultimate wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning and eat your breakfast and watch the sunrise and run around the field 5 times and build your vitality and execute and achieve, but with a sense of discipline and a sense of meeting your potential and giving it its earthly fulfillment through discipline, rigor, hard work, and mastery, self-mastery and mastery of your gifts. It's a serious, Saturn is in Aquarius, so interestingly, humanitarian, medical activities can start to be met with a degree of discernment at this time. Saturn rules Aquarius. Aquarius is a humanitarian sign, but it is still ruled by Saturn, so it's extraordinarily discerning. It's not a sign, unlike the conventional opinion about the age of Aquarius being somehow hugging and compassion. It's about a kind of compassion, but it's still very measurable and very scientific. It is about taking a measurable approach to helping humanity. Vaccinations. If you're going to give help, it's not about overflowing love and compassion as much as it is about implementing wells where they need to be implemented and making sure people have access to water and sanitation. And it's Saturn. It's concrete results that impact and help humanity in practical ways, in ways that count. It's not here, no matter who you are, I'm going to heal you through love. We leave that to Pisces and understanding and compassion. Very often, some of the things that are projected onto Aquarius as a sign really belong to Pisces because of this kind of age of Aquarius. Hippie, long hair, no clothes, singing with guitars. Stereotype that's been propagated by Hair, the musical Hair. So we have Saturn strong in its own sign, giving us a bit of a break from Capricorn achievement and intensity and going into discernment in humanitarian ways. We have the other co-ruler of Aquarius in Taurus, which is ruled by Venus, and Venus is also in its own sign. So this is a strong new moon. Its ruler Mars is strong and powerful in Capricorn and has made some intense transits and is going to meet up with Saturn, the planet. Someone is doing something, taking an axe to something, I think. I'm so sorry. I'm going to keep going. Just stay with me. Maybe this will prompt me to finish up. Mars is going to be conjunct Saturn, the planet that rules this new moon, on March the 31st. So the planet ruling this new moon, strong, powerful, already impactful, is going to meet up with one of its dispositors on the 31st, strong in its own sign. And the other dispositor of this chart, Venus, is also strong in its own sign. And Venus's impact is very much on balance, harmony. Greening is what I titled Venus in Taurus, whether it is money or whether it is relationships or whether it is the feminine principle of things growing and occurring naturally within the principles of divine intelligence. It's stabilizing Venus, and it's a practical, resource-based Venus. It's a strong new moon conjunct Chiron healing, ruled by action-oriented Mars, who has been on a bit of a rampage as this week has gone on in Capricorn. Mars being managed by Saturn, strong in Aquarius, but discerning in a humanitarian way, and also Venus in Taurus. Practical, generous, loving, but in a way that is about somehow natural law. You know how it is that, you know how a plant will, we've observed this, you know, trees go fruit. Somehow the bees and the wasps, somehow birds, somehow before it starts to rain, living beings know that they need to disappear. Somehow a shoot of grass finds its way through some stones. That principle of divinely coded intelligence that we're all as humans trying to catch up to but can never master. The principle of life. Certainly all the news that we've had this week, and we've expected a certain amount of pummeling, doesn't necessarily put us in an optimistic space. And Chiron, as I've mentioned to you before when I interpret it in a chart, yes, the word healing is used, but the wound is not far behind. In fact, it is the wound that needs to be examined. And it is through the examination of that wound and removing the triggers that create that wound that have been in place for a long, long time that healing can take place. If you know where Aries sits in your chart, you might be able to put two and two together and figure out how this is going to impact you in a personal way. But having a new moon in Aries, the moon is not happy in Aries. It's just not stable. Aries is a very uncontented sign, and the moon is seeking contentment. But a new moon in Aries may give us a certain energy to go out and do things and fix things. So at the very least, a new moon in Aries to some extent is about identifying pressure points and those things that we are not comfortable with, those things that are causing us pain and discomfort, and actively going and changing the thermostat so that the right systems can kick in to bring the temperature to the right place so that we can be content again. There's something about Aries that just focuses on the discontent and then gets into action to fix it. So there's going to be that aspect to this. If you know where Aries sits in your chart, that's where this new moon is occurring, and this new moon of healing is occurring, and there's an encouragement to sit and examine the wound, remove the triggers, and start the healing process. On a more global level, when we look at a crisis like the one we're facing, I think it points to a number of wounds that have been placed for a long time. Not only the wound related to this virus, but a lot of structural wounds as well. And it remains to be seen for us how it is that we can move forward and start to heal. If something occurs right after this new moon that comes not as a ray of spring, but as the clouds breaking and pretty much spring descending from the heavens, some sort of miracle thing, fine, we'll take it. But the signs, you know, I certainly would like something like that to happen so that my life could get back to normal, and yours can, and everyone's can. But if these transits are to be believed, then some part of this process is a year-long greening, a year-long rejuvenation of where a forest fire has been running at least since December 2017. And so a certain amount of patience is encouraged. That said, what I will leave this with is certainly in comparison to the last full moon and the last new moon, this is potentially a more encouraging new moon. because it is a new moon of healing. But again, we do need to contend with the wound. Personally, wherever Aries sits in our chart, and globally. Okay, I will leave it at this. If you like this video, if you found it useful, feel free to share it, comment on it, like it, subscribe to my YouTube channel. There's a bell icon next to the subscribe button in YouTube, and if you click on that, you'll be notified when I do new videos. And my contact information is in the description area, so you can contact me to inquire about rates for readings, or if you want me to make an easy-to-read version of your chart that will tell you where different signs sit in your chart and what houses they occupy. But you need to know your birth time for that. Okay, I'm going to be done with this. More to follow. We do need to talk about Aries as a sign this year, and when the other transits are going to be occurring in it. At some point, Mercury is going to come in here, and Mars certainly is going to be here for a certain amount of time. So that's the other thing about this new moon, I would say. Just pay attention to what it is bringing up, because there's a larger narrative at work here in this part of the chart for the rest of the year as well, especially the second half of the year. All right, everybody, over and out.